Yes.
Hi.
It's really good that you know that this is your floor now. You have 20 minutes for your presentation, and then people can ask whatever they are interested in. So very nice from you that you came. Which mic do you want to use? This one or this one? I don't know. This is working. Okay, go against the trend. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Robert Hogan.
Good morning. Can you hear me now? Yes. How do I get this up there?
It's over there.
Yeah. Oh, you're smarter than me. Or I can use that. Well, so good morning, and thank you very much for coming. It's nice to see you all. I'm an absolute nut on the subject of leadership. It's what I think about all the time. What's wrong now? That's not going to be too loud? That's not too loud, because noisy Prague, people need loud. Yeah. And the reasons I'm so interested in leadership is I'm a retired naval officer. I spent some 7 years in the Navy, and I fought with the Navy the whole time. I had my ideas about how to manage sailors, and they had their ideas about how to manage sailors. My sailors worked, theirs didn't, but the last year I was on my ship, I had to eat with the crew every day. I had so many fights. I actually like BAP fights with the other officers about the way you're supposed to manage troops. So anyway, when I got out of the Navy, I said, I really would like to know what the truth is about leadership, and that's sort of how I got going on this. So first of all, he said, let's see if this works. Nope, it didn't work that way, this thing. I can do this, Blank. No, I can't, it's not working. Is that what I have to do?
Yes.
Oh, this guy. Thank you. So leadership's the most important problem. It is the most important problem in human affairs. When good leadership's in place, people prosper, organizations thrive, churches work, universities work, businesses make money. When bad leadership's in place, things fall apart. What's bad leadership? Hugo Chavez, Venezuela. Imagine this is a map of the world, and you put a blindfold on and threw a dart at the map of the world. Chances are 7 out of 10 that your dart would land in a failed country. I mean, that's just, you're lucky living in the Czech Republic. So, doink, no, doink. I can do this, ah. This one. The big one.
Yes.
So, given how important leadership is, what's the status of leadership in the world today? Well, Gallup has been studying leadership, employment groups, has been studying employees for about 40 years. They have a regular finding, it's quite routine, it's like when does the tide come in, when does the sun set? They report 65% of the global workforce is alienated. Now, the best single predictor of business unit performance is employee engagement level. If employees are engaged, you get good performance. If employees are disengaged, you get bad performance. 65% of the global workforce is disengaged. See if I can get this right this time. No, I'm not ready yet. 65 to 75% of the U.S. workforce say the worst aspect of their life, the most stressful aspect of their life, the worst single part of their life is their immediate boss. 65 to 75% of the U.S. workforce say they would take a pay cut if someone would fire their boss. 20% of the Baltimore workforce, that's why I used to live in Baltimore, 20% of the Baltimore workforce say they spend some time every day actively fantasizing about murdering their boss. Every employed adult, 100% of the workforce, every employed adult reports having spent some significant time working for an intolerable boss. Not bad, just intolerable. So what's that all about? Oh, so when I first started studying leadership, everyone was focused on heroes and Musk's and Bezos and Gates and company. And I thought, well, I was interested in these numbers here, and I thought, so I was at a conference in 2002. It was about 350 people. They were all business suits, McKinsey and guys. And they were room packed, standing room only, all very fancy guys who made their money doing leadership management consulting. And I said, what would you estimate the base rate of managerial incompetence in corporate America to be? What percentage of existing managers are incompetent? Some guy over here said 2%. Guy over here said 3%. Guy over here said 6%. It says 350 people. I said, what would you say if I told you that the base rate of management incompetence in corporate America is somewhere between 65 and 75%? And they went, "Wah!" Like this, "Ah!" They're shaking their fists at me. "Ah!" It was great. And I said, you're a bunch of whores. You take money from organizations to tell them what they want to hear, and that's just wrong. And that's when it all sort of started. So so I'm an academic. I'm a recovering academic. I spent 40 some odd years in the universities, and so in university, I mean, what academics have to say is mostly what you need to depend on for your basis of truth in the world. But I think the academic study of leadership has failed, and it's failed for one big reason, which is that they typically define leadership in terms of the people who are at the top of the organization. They talk about the leadership team, the leadership group. If you're in charge, you're by definition a leader. But he said, who gets to the top of large, bureaucratic, hierarchical, male-dominated organizations? The answer is politicians. Smart, ambitious, politically astute people who may or may not have any talent for leadership. So, and 2/3 of the current CEOs are going to fail. They're going to be fired. They're going to be sent away for various kinds of reasons, misconduct, chicanery, robbery, theft, so forth. So the accepted definition of leadership is clear. Here, these two guys here are in the picture. That's Jack Welch and Jeffrey Immelt. They were the two guys who ruined General Electric. Now, in 1990, Jack Welch, Fortune magazine named Jack Welch the manager of the century, the manager of the century. And then he left his wife and ran off with a woman from Harvard Business Review and wrote a book on leadership about how to, Anyway, he's an awful guy. He fired 250,000 people. He ruined the company. And then the guy that followed him was, and they call the employees at GE called Jack Welch Neutron Jack, because wherever he stepped, no grass would ever grow again. So anyway, so according to academics, these two guys are leaders. According to me, these two guys were failures. They ruined their companies. So what do practitioners think about the state of the academic knowledge base on leadership? The answer is they don't take it seriously at all. Among colleagues and clients with whom I worked, I can't recall, this is a practicing consultant, I can't recall a single person who relied on academic literature in management in any serious way because they get it wrong. So academics study they study the people at the top to understand what's best and finest. I thought, if you're not getting anywhere studying the best, what's the alternative? And I took a page from two of my heroes, Freud and Piaget, both of whom studied failures and mistakes and errors in order to understand normal function. I thought, if we don't know anything about good leadership, what about bad leadership? First question is, how much is there? And the answer is a whole lot. So I thought, in the bottom is what Rosta said, it's time for some thinking outside the academic mainstream. It's time to turn to what we call the fugitive literature. There's no original thinking in the academic mainstream. The academic world functions so as to suppress new ideas and innovation. So let's go outside the mainstream, and what can we find? And I'll give you 4 sources from what I call the fugitive literature that shaped my thinking. First was this terrific book by a retired British Army officer named Norman Dixon. The book is called The Psychology of Military Incompetence. It changed my head. This is a story of, he reviews in detail 10 major British military disasters. They're actually, it'll break your heart to read them. The suffering that's inflicted on soldiers by incompetent officers is just horrible. And what he shows is in each of these cases, in every case, the problem was the officer in charge, and the problem and he was not a psychologist. He just did a kind of a behavioral description, but what you can see is that these guys were narcissistic, paranoid, micromanaging, obsessive compulsive. They fit standard categories of psychiatric diagnosis. And let's see. So I thought, well, there you go. There's somebody who agrees with me that a lot of the people at the top of these organizations are just incompetent, and they're incompetent in ways that you can assess if you think about it. The second paper that really got me going was a paper by a fellow named Fred Herzberg. This was the most best regarded article in the history of the Harvard Business Review up until a certain point in time. He was concerned about how to improve employee motivation or how to not destroy employee motivation. He was a Maslow guy. He was all about self-actualization. He thought well, first thing he found was, it's just a standard finding, 65% of the employees in every organization he studied, 65% of the employees were alienated. They were really mad at their boss. He said, okay, now what can I do to improve their motivation? He said, there are two ways. One is I could improve I could help them self-actualize, or second, I could just fire their boss. And he found the only way he can improve employee motivation was to fire the bad bosses. There's a lesson there. So freedom from bad management was more important than having an opportunity to self-actualize. The third thing that really got me going was an unpublished paper by a fellow named John Bentz, who's a little guy about this tall, but he was a really nice guy. He was the director of management research for Sears. Back in the 60s and 70s, Sears was a huge retail operation in the United States. It was one of the biggest. It was bought by a VC guy who ruined it and just ran it right in the ground. But it was a very prosperous and successful organization at time one. And Bentz was in charge of management selection and evaluation. So he hired he hired hundreds of new managers at Sears using a well-validated and carefully developed assessment process. He was a really smart guy. So he only hired people. I don't know what the gender makeup was. But everyone he hired had a glittering bright side, charming, pleasant, socially poised, and bright. And guess what? 65% of them failed. That's the base rate. That's the number. And he was a very thoughtful guy. He just went through in his spare time and classified the reasons for their failure. And he found that they failed for 11 recurring reasons. And these reasons, when I read this paper, I said, ooh, those look like the DSM-4 Axis 2 personality disorders, which I was familiar with from my background and other things I used to do. So there it was. It kind of replicates what Dixon had found, but in a more systematic way. So Bentz gave a talk at the Center for Creative Leadership, CCL, in North Carolina, and two guys who worked there, Morgan McCall and Michael Lombardo, said, that's something we can do. So they basically replicated Bentz's study using data that they had available at CCL. And what did they find? The same thing. All these executives in their study were socially skilled and had good track records, bright, smart, upward and mobile. But about 65% of them failed. That's the number. And they failed for the same reasons that Bentz's managers failed. Those same, over control, paranoia, narcissism, blah, blah, blah. There it is. So there you go. So with those 4 studies in mind, I said, I think we're on to something here. So summarizing the fugitive literature, people get hired based on their experience and their performance in an interview. About 65% of them will fail if you only hire them based on interviews. And the reasons they fail can be placed in about 11 categories, recurring categories, systematic, well-defined categories. The reasons they fail are not visible or apparent when you're hiring them, when you're interviewing them. You can't see it. So we then developed this method for assessing derailment, and we've been using that for over 20 years now. We have, Ryan Sherman tells me we have over 1 million cases. We have a lot of data. We're basically an engineering company. We're very data-based and everything. We're very numbers-driven. And so I say we learned using this HDS, which we call it the Hogan Development Survey, but it really was the Hogan Dark Side measure. But I couldn't call it dark side, because people get mad when you talk about the dark side. So here are 5 lessons learned from that. These are the 5 lessons, and now we can leave. So first of all, bright side versus the dark side. People's behavior varies quite significantly depending on whether they're on stage or off stage. It varies depending on whether they care about the audience reaction. If they're paying attention to how they're being evaluated, then you get the bright side. If they don't care about how they're being evaluated, you get the dark side. They relax, they let down, and you see the real them, as it were. I had this conversation with people that talk about, being authentic, being real, being true. You can't, life is about, in my view, life is about self-presentation. It's about putting on appropriate performances in front of the right audiences. Well, that's fake, right? And they say, what about the real you? And my line is, the real you is probably something you should be ashamed of. Let's stay on the bright side. So we see the bright side in the job interviews. We see the bright side when we've gone on our first date. We see the dark side when we hire them. We see the dark side after we marry them. Okay, doink. So where do they come? Where does it come from? It comes from people. Dark side behaviors. People have adopt dark side behaviors because they work. They'll allow them to get their way in any single interaction. So dark side behaviors will work in any single interaction. But the problem is that life is not about life is not about one-offs. It's not about single interactions. It's about recurring interactions. And over time, the dark side just destroys relationships. Having trouble keeping up with my notes here. So there you go. Dark side behavior creates short-term wins and long-term problems. The dark side is based on their real strength associated with dark side behavior. So something we call excitable. People with high scores on excitable are passionate, intense, and driven, and that's really attractive. So all the dark side, the 11 dark side behaviors contain some very positive. So there's a scale called skeptical. People with high scores on skeptical are very insightful about politics. They know what's going on, and they know who's out to get them. So there's really positive attributes associated with all these 11 characteristics. The problem is that they get overused. They go too far with them. So too much dark side, we say, will get you fired, but not enough dark side will get you overlooked. You won't have a career. You'll be seen as, you just somehow won't be paid attention to. The more talented the person, the greater the potential dark side. Yep, that's true. And power, and I love, this is my favorite. If you don't remember anything else from this talk, remember this. Power doesn't corrupt. People don't get bad because they have power. Power doesn't corrupt. Power reveals. When they've got power, then they can just be themselves. And remember, the real you is something you probably want to keep to yourself. So, identity and reputation. Identity is the story that you tell yourself about yourself. It's you when you're at your most self-conscious and self-absorbed. Identity is the story you tell yourself about yourself. Reputation is a story that other people tell about you. The way I like to phrase this is, there's the you that you know, and there's the you that we know. And the you that you know is probably not worth knowing because you made it up. And the you that we know is absolutely essential knowledge because we got it. It's converging opinions. Truth is in social consensus. Identity is so the you that you know, how good are you at your job? That's me asking you how good you are at your job. Well, that's you. That's not a very good predictor of your performance. The you that we know, your reputation, is a powerful predictor of your performance. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Your reputation is a summary of your past behavior. It's the best data source we have regarding how you're going to behave in the future. So there you go. Bad managers are happy with their identities, and they don't care how people react to them. But the staff always know, the employees always know who the good managers are and who the bad managers are. They know, and don't ask the boss. The bosses evaluate their subordinates based on how much they like them. Their peers evaluate their other peers based on how much of a threat they are. The subordinates always know who the good leaders are because they're the consumers of leadership. So that's where you go for your information. This is one of the two most important pieces of leadership research ever published. There's a guy named Luthans in Nebraska. They don't have anything else to do in Nebraska. It's cold there. It's our Siberia. He studied two large groups of managers in various organizations for a period of 2 years, and he got this incredibly rich database. Very comprehensive data on these guys. At the end of 2 years, he said he wanted to then find out what a good man had. Personality data, he had behavioral data, he had peer data, he had all kinds of information. So he said, what does a good manager look like? So he asked the organization for their good managers. Well, what he found was that the good managers fell into two camps. On the one hand, there were people, they're mostly guys who got rapid promotions, rapid pay raises, and juicy assignments. So they were the high potentials. They were the people everyone talked. They're the guys who stood out. Everyone said she is our high potential. So that's a high potential group. The second group were people whose business units were performing at a very high level. Okay, got that? People who were identified as high potential, people who were running successful units. And the good news and the bad news, I guess, the bad news is that those two groups only slightly overlap. They overlapped by about 10%. So, but the real news was how did they spend their time? The people who were regarded as high potential spent their time doing politics. They spent their time networking. They spent their time, what's going on over there? Going to meetings, making themselves, working the group, working the crowd. The people whose business units were performing at a high level spent their time working on their teams. So there you got your choice now. You're going to promote a guy to a manager. Who do you want? Somebody who stands out and is good at politics, or someone who's running an effective team? The problem, and that's where the problems come from, is the guys who stand out get the job, and the guys who are running an effective team get ignored. So it's because they don't have enough dark side. So the standing out and being noticed, we call that emergence. Running a competent or high-performing team, we call that effectiveness. So we make a distinction between emergence and effectiveness. People get promoted based on emergence. They should get promoted based on effectiveness. So there you go. High-profile managers are often charismatic, but not necessarily effective. Charisma is all about standing out. Charisma is all about emergence. Effectiveness is about getting things done. So, lesson 4, the myth of the charismatic leader. How am I doing on time?
You're doing great.
Okay. Well, what happened was in the 1940s and 50s, the average CEO was paid about 4 times as much as the employees. And then there came the rise of the activist investors, people like Carl Icahn and T. Boone Pickens, who said to the board, I'm not getting enough money for my investment. I need better performance out of your organization. I'm putting all this money in there. I require better returns. So that then puts the focus on the hiring process. So now the activist investors saying, we need better returns. We better get a CEO in here who can give us. So now you're interviewing CEO candidates. And here's a guy who says, well, you know, I make some changes here and I can make some changes there. And I probably make it a little more. That's one guy. That's his interview. I can make, fine-tune things, tune up the processes, better accounting. Second guy comes in and says, I can give you the returns that you need. I can give you the profits that you deserve. I can take this company to the next level. I can make America great again. Who gets the job? So charisma is this dynamic presence, an appealing vision. It's the courage to challenge the status quo, to make America great again. It's related to narcissism. Charisma is correlated with narcissism at the same level as height is correlated with weight. So charisma and narcissism are very tightly connected. The second most important piece of leadership research, I think, in the history of the business is a book by a guy named James Collins called Good to Great. He studies 1,300 New York Stock Exchange rated companies. He finds 11 companies that had 15 years of performance significantly below the average for the industry, and then 15 years of sustained performance significantly above the average for the industry. And he was an economist, he was looking for structural differences, tax code, law, legal changes that would explain. And his staff said, no, it's the CEOs that make the difference. So he went around and he interviewed these 11 CEOs, the CEOs of the 11 high-performing companies. He said that it was the damnedest thing. He said, when you walked in the room, you couldn't tell who the CEO was. They had these 11 super high-performing Hall of Fame CEOs, all had the same 2 characteristics in common. Well, they were smart, obviously, and politically astute, but they were all quite humble, and they were fiercely competitive. They really, really wanted to win. So it's a combination of humility and competitiveness is what makes for a great CEO or a great leader. So, but the takeaway point is not just that power reveals, but also the charismatic leadership is a myth. It's dysfunctional. Narcissists ruin companies. Charismatic people are typically narcissistic, and narcissistic people run companies. Okay, now we get to what I think is a genuine meat of the talk, as it were. People who study biology and evolutionary theory know that life is about competition. It's about competition. Life is competition. That's all it is. You can't just groove along. Life, you have to compete. Now, there are 2 kinds of competition. There's competition it's what Darwin calls sexual selection. There's competition within the group for status, power, and the control of resources. So it's what goes on in every human group. Who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down, who's rising, who's falling, who's the next VP, who's going to be the next president, blah. So there's always competition within the group for status, power, control of resources. Then there's competition between the groups for survival, for staying alive. And one's a little bit more important than the other. Let's see, what do I say next here? Yeah, so the principal factor driving human evolution was warfare. It wasn't who had the best hairdo. It was sexual selection was what was going on inside the group. Warfare was what was going on between the groups. The history of the species, as far back as it goes, shows it was constant warfare. Paleolithic remains, archaeological remains of old show incredible trauma and battering, broken bones, smashed up, projectiles on their heads, so forth. There's evidence of mass cannibalism, killing whole families and then dressing them out to eat the same way you dress out moose or bison or horses, I don't know. So people used to process other people the same way they processed other kind of protein sources. So you're living in the woods there, and you're living in this part of the woods, and these guys are living in this part of the woods, and at some point they decide they like your resources better than theirs, and they come to get your resources. When they come for your resources, they don't come with their lawyers. They come with evil intent. So in 1890, an Australian whaling ship pulled into Auckland Harbor, where the Maoris lived, and they were chatting up the Maoris, and they said, you know, 250 miles to the east, there's some islands with people there that look just like you. 2 weeks later, the Maoris took off in like 12 war canoes, went to it's called the Chatham Islands, and when they got there, they ate every person on the island. So you can be the star in your group, but if the Maoris come for you, it doesn't matter who's in charge. Do you see my point? There's a competition within the group, and that's where people focus, but there's competition between groups for literal survival, and that's what leadership, there's where leadership matters. Leadership is what you do when they come to you. And just my point here, this is a quote from the Old Testament of the Bible, which is, when you capture a city, kill every man in it, put everyone to the sword, utterly destroy them, leave nothing alive. And as for the women and the children, they're yours. So, I mean, that's basically operating instructions from the Old Testament. That's social reality. So competition within the group for status, competition between groups for survival, and leadership is about the second. Emergent leadership concerns rising to the top, being the popular guy, winning the poll. Effective leadership concerns building a team that can beat the competition. Leadership, this would be my key line. Leadership is an evolved solution to the problem of organizing collective behavior in order to survive. And by evolved solution, for me, I need to, if you unpack that, what I'm saying is that people actually have pre-wired categories in terms of which they can evaluate the leadership competency of other people. Because it's been so important. We know what good leadership looks like. You just have to ask people. People know what good the staff, the subordinates, the workforce knows what good leadership looks like. They just don't get it very often. So leadership is a resource for the group, not a source of privilege for the incumbents. And that's an important line. That's my line, by the way. I didn't steal that one. So how do you define leadership? You should define it in terms of the ability to build and maintain a high-performing team. And you should evaluate leadership in terms, that's what, for us, athletics is a superb model for studying leadership because the results are really clear. You build a team, you run it. Successful teams have good leaders, bad teams don't. So the performance of teams always depends on how the staff reacts to the leaders, and people, the question is, will they work for you because they have to, or will they work for you because they want to? And the second is better than the first. So leadership is in the eyes of the led. It's defined by the people who are being pushed around. It's real, it's consequential. Behaviorism was a mistake. Good leadership is pretty much the same within and across organizations and within and across cultures. So good, effective leadership at Toyota is the same as good leadership at Ford. It's good. It doesn't depend on it doesn't depend on the industry, and it doesn't depend on the country. Good leadership is good leadership. It involves creating follower engagement, getting people on board with you, getting them to follow you because they want to. Charisma is related to narcissism. Humility is related to leadership. And bad leadership explains the great resignation. People don't always have to suffer in silence. So, yeah, boink. I didn't do it. So in here, this is it. I mean, these are, when I said people have built-in pre-wired categories of evaluating the potential of a leader. These are what they're looking for. Will you tell them what they want and give them some support to get the structure and consideration? People have known about this since the end of World War II. Structure and consideration is the foundation of leadership. You tell them what you want, tell them how, and then provide them the resources they need to get there. Do you have integrity? Can you be trusted? Do you keep your word? Do you play favorites? Do you cheat? Do you lie? So it's structure and consideration, integrity. Then this one, the third one, is something that psychologists never talk about, and it's really, really important. Do you know what you're talking about? If you're in charge, people will be coming by every day, all day long, asking you for advice. How do I fix this? How do I fix the other thing? And if you don't know what you're talking about, they figure it out almost. I was a brand new officer. I went up to my chief petty officer and I said, "What do you need from me?" And he said, "Stay out of my way. You don't know what you're talking about." And I said, "You're right." I mean, I knew I didn't know what I was talking about, but I wasn't arrogant. So this is the problem with the myth of the MBA. Notion is if you get an MBA, there's a formal body of business knowledge. If you understand those principles, you can do any job and you don't have to know what's going on at the level of the workforce. The answer is, I'm done. And the answer is, you do have to know what's going on at the level of the workforce. Otherwise, people think you're incompetent. And then finally, so there's four things. You got structure and consideration, integrity, competence, and then finally, you got to provide some kind of a vision that's worth following. Explain to them why they should be doing this, why it makes sense, why it's in their best interest, why you should be believed. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Do you have a question or more questions? Of course. I will hand you the mic.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I should stand up or ask my question while sitting. All right. I am quite small, therefore that would help. Now, thank you very much for the most interesting presentation. I'm Beata Sokolowska from the Stanton Chase office in Warsaw. We are an executive search company, and we have partnered with Hogan and with your methodology in our search work and assessment work. Thank you. I believe we are. The question that I have is about women in leadership. All the presentations, all the figures and numbers were of great interest to me, and I am most thankful for being able to listen. But there is a recurring trend to increase the share of women leadership in leadership teams. And I wonder if you have any statistics available whether these observations hold true for female managers, female leaders, in terms of how many people of their staffs are still dissatisfied, would like to get rid of them, and whether there is any impact of gender, in how the staffs perceive their bosses. Thank you.
Well, on that, I mean, there's an academic answer, and then there's some good news and some bad news. The academic answer is that women look just the same as men in terms of performance value. Ryan Sherman has actually written on this. He knows more about this than I. From my point of view, I'd say the good news and the bad news. The good news is that I think women have more natural talent for leadership than men because they're more insightful, they're just genuinely more politically intuitive. They're more thoughtful about how they present things. They think things through. They think they play along. They can't get away with bullying people. So the good news is that I think they have more natural, innate talent for leadership. The bad news is that the base rate of incompetent management in women is the same as the base rate of incompetent management in men, but they differ in how the bad management is displayed. Men bully, intimidate, yell, talk down to you, but bad lady managers destroy your basic humanity because they're more insightful and they know how to do it. And that's not my data, that's data from the University of Minnesota. So bad lady managers are actually worse than bad men managers when they decide to be bad. So good news is they have more natural talent for it. Bad news is that if they decide they want to get after you, they do it in a really vicious way.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I
Okay.
can't see no one. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for
Thank you for your
everything. You can leave it here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hogan, once again. Let me switch into Czech for just a few seconds.